My exploration of the Black Indian connection began in South America, where, when I was examining some of the ancient temples in Bolivia and in Peru, I could notice and was informed of the possibility of the connections of these ancient indigenous peoples with those of traveling Africans, in particular Egyptians. Traveling throughout South America, whether it was in Bolivia, Ecuador, or Brazil, I often came across instances where Black and First Nations peoples had intermingled and interchanged their culture. However, the most striking example that I found was in the Yungas in Bolivia. Here I came upon a village where descendants of African slaves who had been brought by the Spanish to pick on the plantations had intermarried with the local Quechua and Aymara Indians. What was extremely striking to me was how this was reflected in the features of the various inhabitants of the village that I saw. The African people upon their arrival had taken on the local Aymara customs of dressing, as well as their traditions of harvesting and planting coca. One of the developments that had occurred in this fusion was the creation of saya music. This music involves various African instrumentation combined with elements of Aymara and Quechua Indian instrumentation. In the village, I was able to speak with Daniel Barra, and here we watch a performance that he did with his daughter. My experiences in South America, where I had seen the way that various African slaves had allied themselves with the indigenous peoples of the areas, made me want to further explore what had occurred in North America. I had come across accounts of various tribes as the Seminoles and other inhabitants in especially the south of the U.S. that had in particular aided escaped African slaves. I journeyed to San Francisco, where I met Amelie Prescott, an educator and somebody who herself was of both Black and First Nations identity.
I knew when I was growing up that I was Creole, and my parents never really talked too much about what that mixture was. Except I knew my daddy couldn't get a job as a physicist in Louisiana, so we had to move up to Boston. But some people asked me if I was Black when I was growing up, because I always got real dark in the summer. And I was sort of thrilled with that. And especially when I lived in Maryland and there was sort of this still division. This was like in the 50s and early 60s. And so there was still a lot of segregation going on. And I never took it personally, or, you know, it was just sort of interesting to me when I'd sit to the back of the bus. So my mother made me wear a little silver bracelet, a little Indian bracelet actually, with the beginning of the summer, so that I could show that I had a tan, so that I didn't have to go to the back of the bus and that I didn't have to go to the colored bathrooms. When I was teaching in East Oakland and discovered that a lot of my students were part Indian, and as I taught about the native ways, my students' parents would come in and say yes, they knew that somebody back in the family was Indian or something, but that was never spoken of. And I wondered why, then they'd sort of whisper it, like they didn't talk about it much. And then I found this, and I talked to people about it, and then I found this book that's very specifically said, it was called Black Indians, and it very specifically said that the slaves would escape from the plantations, go to the Indian reservations, be welcomed, and then we'd all be together and hang out and have babies, and then the army would come along and say, there's no Indians here. You've lost all your tribal rights. Everybody out. And so then everybody would go out and they'd go across, usually to California, usually Nevada, places like that, but with no tribal rights. So you couldn't say, well, I'm half Choctaw or half this or half that. That tribal name was gone, those rights were gone. So that's something that the Army had and the government had wanted to prevent, was this union coming together. It discouraged them from associating with black people, but it was usually the other way around. It was worse to be an Indian than it was to be black. So, you know, you could look black and everything. You didn't have to say you were part Indian. I mean, that, you know, maybe if that didn't show, I mean, people that knew would see the features. But if you didn't know, and most people didn't, they wouldn't be looking for that. So black people didn't say they were part Indian because they could get killed for that. You might be oppressed and stuff if you're black. Well, you know, you might get killed if you're Indian, or messed with in some, or your children taken away. Thank you. You know, and put in the missionary schools, or just put somewhere. I mean, that was a very common thing. Take the children away, put them in white homes, so then they wouldn't know. You know, a lot of children that were Indian, part Indian, or mixed, didn't know. Because that was like Mike Bronte didn't know. So I told him, I mentioned it to him. And he went and found his birth mother. And she said yes. But you could just see it in the way he moved and in his aura and in his energy, that that's what was going on. But he was adopted, and so he didn't know. Nobody told him.
I really identified mostly with being black because that's other people's perception of me predominantly. But I've always had a sense of the fact that I'm Native American, and until recently I've been in denial of the fact that I have white blood in me. And so it's like it's a very confusing thing. So I have one of my other songs I'm writing, it's called Sometimes I Feel Like a Sociogenetic Experiment, which is about the confusion of like living in a society that is racially intolerant and being a mix of all those things. I feel as though part of me was stolen from my country, and then I had my country stolen from me.
Oh, I have a friend whose mother was Cherokee. She's still trying to figure it out because, as Amelie said, you know, Native people were considered nothing. So a lot of times they were in the black community and hid out there, you know, and they were black because people in my family, you know, and I looked around, I said, oh, this is the deal. Well, who's what? I don't even know because you can't tell. So it's like, it was a perfect way to be safe, you know, and I think that a lot of black people today haven't maybe seen the reason, the necessity to come forth. I mean, what, so what? You know, yeah, you know, my grandmother was Native, you know, so what? You know, I mean, it's part of our family. It's just not a big deal, you know, and I think that we need to know how important it is today, you know, to align ourselves. And some people feel like that they might do that and it might be exploited. So I think something we need to talk about, you know, and also in the Native community. Let me tell you, they're not featuring it a lot. You know, I mean, I've been in the Native community a lot, and people were not having me, you know, and I was not getting the respect that I felt like I needed. So it's painful to go, you know, you go to your Native brothers and sisters, and they're saying, you know, it's sort of like the race is whiter. And I had a person told me once, he said, look at my skin. He said, my skin is the same color as yours. He said, let me tell you, there's a lot of white blood amongst natives. And don't feel bad, you know, because we're also struggling with the same issues. And you know, I found that to be true. So I think that for a lot of reasons, blacks are not coming forth. Not necessarily because they don't want to acknowledge it, but just like, what, so what? You know, this is the reality. This has always been that way. It's nothing to talk about. So I think that's one of the things.